This is episode 12 of Plants It Where the Sun Don't Shine, and today we're talking about design principles for the shade garden. Hey, welcome to Plants It Where the Sun Don't Shine, a podcast for people looking for plant ideas that work well in shadier spots of the garden without relying on the much overused hosta. Do I hate hostas? No, not really, but I do like lots of other shade-loving plants and want to share some of them with you so you don't have to just rely on hostas when you're gardening in shadier locations. I'm Dr. Dennis. These are some of my favorites that you can plant where the sun don't shine. Okay, this may be an episode that many people listen to and think, yeah, I already know that, which is fine. And maybe it's new to you. So hopefully this is something that is helpful in some way or form for folks. So what I want to talk about is some common design principles in gardening that I think need to be really considered in specific ways for the shade garden. So these are things that you would do in any garden, but they become really important, some of them especially, as you do this in shadier spots because you're dealing with a different, um, context for planting. So the four principles that I want to talk about are structure, height, color, and repetition. Now, you may choose to do something completely different, and you may think that this is repetitive of things that you already know. That's fine. But these are things that I try to think about when I'm designing my shade garden, and I don't always get it right. Quite often, I move plants in the same season or sometimes in the next season, just because it's living art, really. So gardening is like this artistic expression, and everyone has their own way of doing it. These are the ways that I try to approach it, and I don't always get it right, like I said. So these things are implemented progressively throughout a garden's lifetime and my lifetime. So first off, structure. So how does the plant grow, and what shape does it take? In particular, the shape of the leaves. So, there are lots of plants with different shaped leaves. You get grass-like leaves, you get round leaves, you get spear-shaped leaves, you get palmated leaves, you get, interesting different crimping on edges versus flat leaves. So really, you have to think about how does it grow? Is it going to be a ground cover? Does it get, really, really short? Is it something that's shaped like a vase that a ground cover would fit nicely underneath so you could do underplanting? And then that gives you the space to be able to combine plants in a unique way, as opposed to always just planting the same shape or structure consistently throughout. And to be fair, that might be something that you want to do. Maybe you want just one size, shape, or type of plant throughout your entire garden, and that's monoculture sort of approach, and that's something you like, and go for it. That's up to you. But I like to choose a mix of plant structures to put together so that it is interesting and creates little vignettes in the garden as you move through it. The second principle is considering height. So is it something that grows very tall, 3, 4 feet tall? Is it something that is only about a foot or two in height? Or is it something that's really low growing, like 6 inches or 8 inches maximum? When you are considering the height of the plants, that gives you a nod to where you want to place it in your garden. So usually folks tend to put things that are very tall at the back of the garden, things that are medium in height in the middle of the garden, and things that are low growing. But depending on the shape of your actual garden bed, you might want to put something that's low growing behind or beside something that is medium or taller growing, because as you walk around the garden, you notice something different, and it gives you that little hidden gem that might be tucked away. So you might want to take an opportunity to, create another type of vignette, not always placing everything in that order of tall things at the back, medium things in the middle, and low growing things at the front. Low growing things can also just be mixed in throughout the garden in general, especially if they create a living mulch, because that actually gives you that protection and that buffer, cooling effect on the roots and holding moisture into the soil. So another thing to consider in terms of that height component. So structure, height, and then color. Um, so color is something to really consider in a number of different ways. What are the colors of the flowers? And do you have a mix of flowering times throughout your garden so that, not everything is just blooming in July? Maybe you want to make sure that you have things that are growing in your garden that flower at the beginning of the season, in the middle of the season, and at the end of the season to always give you something interesting that you're looking at. And, one approach is to choose things that all bloom the same color. So maybe you just want to go with a single color throughout your entire garden. Moon gardens have been relatively popular in the last few years. So planting everything that has white blooms because that's the thing that you really like. Other folks like um, warm colors. So planting things that are yellow, orange, or red, that gives you a nice cohesive blend, or things that are all cool colors. So planting things that are purples and blues mixed with maybe some white. So that gives you a cohesion throughout your planting by having all cool color flowers throughout the season. Or you can throw caution to the wind and plant anything you want and have a real mix of colors in terms of the flowers that are in your garden. Another approach is also to take a contrasting a color approach so that things that are on the opposite side of the color wheel are the two colors that you choose to plant in your garden so that it really gives contrast and emphasizes the colors. But again, always making sure that there's a mix of flowering times in the flowers that you choose on the perennials in your garden or in the shrubs. The other thing in terms of color is the way I approach it is I really like to try to make sure that there's a mix of colored leaves. So green being the base, of course, but then you can have leaves that are bluish green, or leaves that are limey yellow green. And then you can also get plants that have variegation on them, whether that's sort of a cream edge or a yellowy white streak through the leaf. That gives interest and breaks up just the solid mass of green, especially when things aren't flowering. Um, I like to make sure that I have a pop of silvery foliage throughout the garden because that just really brightens up a shady garden by having that silver tone in there. And also making sure that those yellowy chartreuse leaves and, dark leafed plants like purple or red leafed perennials are mixed in so that it gives that contrast with the green and or chartreuse and or the silver. So mixing colors of flowers, mixing colors of leaves really gives you something to make it interesting when you're walking through the garden and seeing just this mix of plants as opposed to all being green leafed perennials. The last thing to consider is repetition. So again, you can throw caution to the wind. You can do something completely different and just have one solid plant that you plant throughout your garden that just repeats itself over and over again. And that's just the thing that you have. And it flowers all at the same time. And it's one flower color, a mass planting approach. Totally up to you. That's your choice. For me, I like to make sure that there's repetition. And what I mean by that is, in the first foot of the garden, there's a plant. And then, 3 feet later, that same plant appears. And then, 3 more feet later, that same plant repeats itself. It's there again. So that there's this feeling of cohesion as you walk through the garden. And maybe it's just one plant that you repeat and then have a mix of other things, or maybe it's a clump of similar shaped plants that you repeat. It's that cohesion that you get by repeating color, shape, and structure in your garden. So those are the 4 things that I think about when I think about gardening: structure, height, color, and repetition. Um, to sort of bring that to life, to give you some examples or some ideas, one thing that you might want to use as a guidepost is like planting an ostrich fern at the back of your garden bed and then repeating it a few feet later. Gives you that vase shape with these lovely green leaves that persist throughout most of the season. Then planting around the base of it, a lady's mantle, which gives you the crimped shaped round leaves that are hydrophobic, and then put up a spray of chartreuse or yellowy flowers at one point, and then maybe you put something that's really low growing beside that, like Blue-eyed Mary, or maybe a heuchera, which would be similar in height as the plant grows, but sends up a similar spray shape in terms of repeating the pattern that is in the lady's mantle. So you get this contrasting leaf color by having a heuchera. Maybe you choose something that's like a reddish color. You would have the chartreuse of the yellowy flowers from the lady's mantle. You'd have these big, bold, vase-shaped ostrich leaves behind it. Ostrich fern leaves, to be clear. Another mix might be something like at the back, you would plant a candelabra primula, and then beside it, you would plant a lungwort, and then beside or in front of that, a tiarella, and then beside of that, a conigras. So in so doing, you'd get this lovely tall shape from the candelabra primula at the back, where it repeats in terms of the lateral height that the flowers are put out on the stems of the primula. You'd have that really interesting lungwort pattern leaf where it has the pop of silvery foliage and green mixed in. Tiarella or heuchera in the front, where you get the unique color and pattern on the leaves that would repeat the shape of the flower stems that you would have from the candelabra primula. And with the whole conigras, you would get this really cool, persistent pop of color that is contrasting to the lungwort if you chose something like Conocloa macro sunflare. So it gets that bright yellowy green grassy leaf that also gets bold red pattern in it, which would also potentially pick up on whatever you choose in terms of the heuchera or the tiarella. So you get that really, interesting blend of shapes and heights and colors, and you get repeating patterns in there as well because of the way that tiarella and heuchera send up their blooms and the way that the candelabra primula also sends up its blooms. These are just ideas for you to consider and examples when you're thinking about designing your shade garden. So once again, that structure, height, color, and repetition. So this episode won't have photos in the Instagram account associated with the podcast because it's just ideas for you to consider in terms of your planting. But wishing you all the best, and get out there and plant it where the sun don't shine. Thanks for listening. Thanks also goes to Sherry Donegan, Jonathan Scott, and of course Ian Jefferson for brainstorming podcast name ideas with me. Credit goes to Sherry on that one. If you have thoughts or ideas you'd like to share, please email me at plantitwherethesundon'tshine@gmail.com. That's one word without the apostrophe. You can also follow the show on Instagram at plantitwherethesundon'tshine with Dr. Dennis. Hosting is provided by Spotify for podcasters. Until next time, thanks for listening. Go plant it where the sun don't shine.